Well, thank you very much, and I'll just direct questions to the panel, and the one who feels best suited to answer step forward. Encouraging news on the requirement, the statutory requirement, according to the Ships Act, which is the unanimous position of this subcommittee and also the law of the land signed by the President of the United States. 327 by the year 2023, 355, another 11 years after that. How will how optimal will that mix be, Mr. Secretary, at those two stages?
Sir, I think, as we talked about in the springtime, we were able to accelerate the plan to 2034 by extending the life of a number of our destroyers. That's not the optimal mix per se. I'll turn it over to Admiral Mers in terms of where he sees a little bit of an imbalance, but it's certainly a workable mix that would allow us to execute the national defense strategy. If you want to jump in.
Yes, sir. First of all, Senator, I'd like to echo Secretary Gertz's appreciation on the enactment of the 19 bill. It just makes every process significantly more efficient.
It was a bipartisan achievement, and I'm proud to have been part of this team.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Regarding the mix, we've been long-time defenders of the proper mix to 355. The 355 is a derived number. We determine what types of ships we need and what numbers, add them all up, and we get the 355 or higher, depending on what study you rally around. When we extended the life of the DDG-51 to 45 years, immediately shifted the shipbuilding plan, left about 20 years as far as total numbers, but in the incorrect mix. However, if you're going to have an incorrect mix, it's nice to have too many destroyers while we're balancing out the remainder of the fleet. So we determined that imbalance is less of a risk, more of an imbalance in the correct direction.
Good point.
But we still need to fill in the rest of the fleet, and holding the fort down with more DDGs is a sound way forward.
Well, let me ask you about some assumptions that might change the plan and get us there faster. Specifically, what would happen if the service life extensions maintained overall shipbuilding funding levels at the fiscal year 2035 level after we get finished with the Columbia-class procurement? That'd be sweet, wouldn't it? Receive supplemental funding for the Columbia program outside the normal account in FY21 through 35, or use the available shipyard capacity identified in the 30-year shipbuilding plan.
Sir, I think all those would be instruments of change to move that to the left. When we built the shipbuilding plan, we built a framework of what a steady, sustainable rate would be, and then where we had opportunities to accelerate should funding become available, whether that's in destroyers or in submarines or in some of the other classes. So those opportunities exist. Depending on the levels of those assumptions you spoke of there's certainly opportunity to move that plan to the left. Okay, I think it is important, though, sir, and I think both my colleagues would share that we're balanced in doing that. And so as we look forward to our plan, we got to make sure we include a balanced force that we can sustain and keep ready, and that's part of the calculus as we move forward as well.
Okay, according to statute, we're supposed to revert back to the BCA caps. I view that as unthinkable and would be irresponsible on the part of this Congress. But what would happen if we did that, or how might a flat or declining defense budget affect the shipbuilding account? What would that do to our national defense readiness?
Sir, I think our job for the
You have 12 seconds, sir.
Yes, sir. Our job for the Department of Navy is, create the best balanced force mix we can, given the funding available. So I won't hypothesize what that might look like in those different budget scenarios, other than to say, you know, we would try and balance with the funding available. Obviously, at the BCA level, that significant a cut would be difficult to imagine us executing the current plan under BCA caps.
Difficult to imagine, yes.
Sir, if I can just add on to that, actually, two pieces. Your previous question about service life extensions, we do that we review every ship for service life extensions and extend what we can. But those last 2 points you made I think are absolutely fundamental to sustaining the shipbuilding plan. That is a steady funding profile and to figuring out an alternate solution to the Columbia funding profile, which we've already identified in the shipbuilding plan, and that's work to be done. Not quite a panic yet, but it's on the horizon. We're going to have to deal with that. As far as the BCA, there would be immediate impact as soon as that went in, depending on how it lasts. I think we can go from immediate to devastating impact on the program.
Thank you very much. Senator Shaheen. Follow up, Admiral Mers, on Senator Shaheen's first line of questioning. I would call to everyone's attention Secretary Gert's opening statement. The emerging threats have not diminished in the last 2 years, have they, Admiral? Do you think they've gotten worse?
Exactly right, sir.
The challenges, I think his statement was that they're more dynamic, and you certainly agree with that. So if anything, there'd be a higher requirement. Now this 355, you mentioned, and I appreciate you saying this is the minimum that we need. A 355 ship fleet is not some best case ideal that we'd like to achieve if everything goes well. Am I correct there?
Yes, sir.
So what do you, I mean, actually, the admirals and generals came back to us with 655, didn't they?
Yes, sir. That was one of the numbers that was evaluated.
And it was, of course, resource challenged, and we have to make all the numbers come out. We don't have unlimited funds. But the 355 is the minimum under a scenario where things were dangerous, but actually less dangerous than they are right now. Am I correct?
Yes, sir. Absolutely correct. When we constructed the shipbuilding plan, first and foremost, we set a steady build rate that would continue to grow the Navy over time at an affordable rate and to protect the industrial base. We put tremendous effort in identifying the extra capacity in the shipyards that we could increase the pace to 355. And that was independent of the service life extensions that we did with not just the DDG 51s, but we're also looking at up to 7 Los Angeles-class submarines that we're going to endeavor to do service life extensions on. The fact is, it's going to take us decades to get there, and the higher the pace, the steeper the ramp, the better. We are also endeavoring to design ships that can take much better advantage of things we can control on a shorter timeline, like the capabilities we put on these ships. The way we've been explaining it is, the CONOPS, the tactics on how the commander employs the ships, that can change in hours, days, weeks. The capabilities, months and years to develop ships, years and decades to put together. So we're endeavoring to design these ships to take on these capabilities under a much shorter timeline to affect these CONOPS. So it's all tied together. 355 is the minimum to get there. The sooner we get there, the better.
And I would just echo also Secretary Gertz, what Senator Shaheen said. We don't want you to be alarmist. We don't want you to exaggerate and wave your arms. You're relaxed about your job, and you're going to do what you can with what we give you. But do tell us the facts, and let's be honest with the American people about how far behind we've gotten. So thank you very much. And
yes, sir. Just one other piece on the Budget Control Act. Obviously, the number is devastating in itself. The other piece that's particularly challenging for shipbuilding is every ships are line item appropriated, and those cuts come down as a equal share to every appropriation. And so not only is the number itself a drastic reduction, which will cause great disruption. How that number will get laid across the budget, should we get in that condition, will be devastating to the way we have funded and constructed our shipbuilding program. So there's a little bit of a double whammy in there that will cause, a complete disruption of the program should that path come to us.
And I think members of the committee, we're actually working on the 2020 budget even as we speak. So the future is imminent. Senator Rounds, the $450 billion that you asked about earlier.
Yeah, I think that can be used to address some of these challenges, I think.
And you agree with that?
Yeah, yes, sir. We certainly agree. I mean, we've done a lot of work looking at common suppliers across our nuclear aircraft carriers and submarine programs, and actually the support of the committee here, both making sure that the suppliers are ready to go and that we can take advantage of doing common buys across those programs so that supplier sees a more steady stream of planned and predictable work. It's challenging enough at the prime level when programs start and stop and move around. It gets really challenging in the second, third, and fourth level suppliers to be able to deal with changing profiles and changing requirements. And so the efforts the committee has done here to help us in that regard will pay off big as we continue along on these important programs.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Secretary, you answered Senator Kane's question about the troubling issue of the advanced weapons elevators. Let's get your thoughts on three others that are significant risks in the Ford class. The electromagnetic aircraft launching system, the advanced arresting gear, and the dual band radar. How we come in on those?
Sir, I would say of all of the technologies on the CVN 78, of which there were many, we proved out on this lead ship. The weapons elevator is the one that's the last one for us to get tied up and work our way through. I think we've got a path there on both the EMALS program, both the launcher and the arresting gear. We've had over 747 both catapults and traps on the CVN 78 during its 81 days.
I hope the numbers were equal of the launches and the.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, okay.
They were, sure.
Relatively, yeah.
Relatively, 24,000 cycle events of that equipment on our shore-based test site there. So we're feeling pretty confident on both of those systems, both on the catapults and the arresting gear there. Dual band radar, again, making good progress there. Don't see any major technical issues with that system as well. And then as we look towards CVN 79, we're seeing fairly drastic reductions in labor hours. HI has proven that once we get this design nailed down, their ability to be efficient in producing those, we're seeing 16% less production labor hours on the second carrier in that class than the first one. And so as we get that design locked down, the efficiencies that we expected to see are bearing out in the production phase.
We're going to be glad we went with the EMALS and advanced arresting gear.
Yes, sir. I mean, the challenge with the legacy systems, one are, parts and being able to produce those, but for the carriers of the future to be able to launch everything from fairly heavy fighter craft and some of the others to very light systems like the MQ-25, you need these systems to have the range of capability you need to launch that different kind of air wing of the future. And so while, yes, there's certainly been technical challenges we've had to work through, it really opens up our ability to operate a wider variety of aircraft from the deck, both manned and unmanned, which I think is going to be critical to those carrier effective operations as we look to the future.
Thank you. Let's talk about frigates. We're supposed to do a competitive award in 2020. Please update the subcommittee on the Navy's acquisition strategy for the new frigate. Is the intent still to award the contract based on full and open competition?
Sir, absolutely. We're marching right along the schedule that we briefed earlier. And recently, the CNO and I both validated the frigate requirements. So we've got those requirements now locked down. That was per the schedule we have. We're drafting the RFP, which we will request for proposal, which we'll get out to industry here this spring. That will give us time to get additional feedback from them. We've been interacting with them throughout this whole design process as we've looked at all the requirements to make sure the requirements were affordable. That draft RFP will then lead to an RFP we plan to release at the end of this fiscal year, which will give us a full year then to award that competitive contract, full and open competition for the frigate program. So that program remains on track, and I'm confident we will execute that to plan.
Now, on the LCS, the Congressional Research Service noted that the Navy did not perform a formal, rigorous analysis to determine the right approach to addressing a set of capability gaps and mission needs with regard to the LCS. How are we going to keep from repeating this experience with the new frigate? And do you challenge the CRS in their conclusion?
Go ahead, Bill.
Sir, I'll take that one. So regarding the CRS on the LCS, no, we don't challenge it. We took some lumps on the LCS. We learned a lot. I am personally a fan of that ship and that ship class. I think it has tremendous utility, and we'll come through all that. I will tell you a lot of the lessons learned. We rolled into the frigate process. The frigate process is a new process for us. We brought industry in early to discuss how these requirements may play out, using their expertise to really discover the art of possible before we set the requirements. Created some anxiety up front, a lot of give and take. I think in the end, industry's happy. We are getting, at least all the vectors are, a much more lethal ship for the price point. And simply because instead of just levying requirements on industry, we're working with them as partners ahead of the requirements process. So I think all that is a much healthier approach to avoid some of the pitfalls we had with some of the earlier classes.
Can you describe the Navy's vision for the future surface combatant force, Admiral? To what extent does extending the service life of the Arleigh Burke class destroyers affect the timeline for procuring the next large surface combatant?
Yes, sir. I touched on that a little bit earlier when I was talking about this spectrum of things we can influence over time. And the piece about the large surface combatant, about making it as an adaptable platform as we can to take advantage of these much more quickly churning capabilities that we're going to have to field, and really adapt it in the time frame of one maintenance cycle, not a dry dock, not an overhaul, but we can do these pier side, we can outfit these ships and move them out. The Arleigh Burke is a fantastic ship. Matter of fact, the Flight 3 that we're delivering soon is going to be pretty much the most capable warship on the seas. The problem with the Arleigh Burke is she's full. We really don't have much room to expand or modernize her much beyond her current platform. Matter of fact, she is capable to the point now that the next large surface combatant is probably going to pick up right where we left off with the Arleigh Burke. So there is this very nice evolution between the two ships where we're testing out the technology on the Arleigh Burke, the adaptability concept of the next generation large surface combatant. I think we're going to be in a much better position to be a lot more agile, both on the industry side and on the warfighting side with this new
What would be
generation.
the time frame, generally speaking, of this next generation?
It's a two-phased approach. The first one, early 20s, 23, 24, and then a follow-on version in the late 20s, really dependent on how this first phase goes.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you.
General Berger, thank you for listening to us for an hour. The minimum Navy requirement for amphibious ships is 38. Combatant commanders need more than 50 amphibious ships on a day-to-day basis. The current inventory includes only 32 amphibious ships, with just 10 to 15 operationally available on a given day. What's being done to close this gap? And let me ask you about either a multi-year or block buy of LPDs.
A couple parts of the answer to your question, Senator. First, the 38 ships, as you mentioned, is the agreed number based on a capacity to land 2 Marine Expeditionary Brigades. The National Defense Strategy requires us to compete and deter and then fight if we need to, which is why the combatant commanders, as you state, say it's higher than 38. And if it's not going to go any higher than that, then that means some risk somewhere in the globe that the Secretary and the Chairman have to balance. What we're doing to close it, what the Navy is doing to close it on the big decks is the next LHA, follow on to the American Tripoli, absolutely critical. And earlier is better from a Navy Marine Corps standpoint, because we need 12 big decks. They are an incredible platform, and anything we can do to move that, accelerate that is a good thing. On the smaller end, the LPD Flight 2s, which is a follow-on, of course, to the San Antonio class, absolutely brilliant use of a hull form that both of the Marine Corps and Navy are happy with, we're comfortable with, and taking advantage of that hull form to replace the LSDs, which are 35, 40 years old, absolutely critical.
Maybe, Mr. Secretary, on the Flight 2, does the Navy plan to buy one ship at a time or block buy? And is multi-year procurement an important tool in cutting costs and stabilizing supplier base? And does the Navy plan to use the $350 million to buy multiple sets of long lead time material?
So generically, we have used block buys and multi-years extremely effectively here with the support of the committee to both accelerate production and save costs. On DDG 51, we'll save $700 million on that multi-year. In terms of the LPD one, it's a little early right now, pre-decisional, in terms of what we'll do with that funding until we sort out our 20 budget. I'll be happy to come brief the committee once we get the 20 budget locked down, and we'll describe the strategy we have when we get the President's budget over here in February.
Okay. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General Berger, let's talk ship to shore. Tell us how we're doing on the Marine Air Ground task forces, and with regard to the ship to shore maneuver and the vision for the future, what are our gaps and shortfalls?
Senator, the connectors that you spoke of, as important as they are right now, they're going to be more important in the future. In the peer competition world, which you alluded to in the beginning, the concept for the Navy's operations and the Marine Corps' naval force forward, we're going to be more distributed. The more distributed are, the more important connectors are. The LCACs we have right now that have been slept once already need to be replaced, and they are being replaced. They have to be. The LCUs that are 45, 50 years old have to also be replaced. Both are going to be critical to move the naval force, the Marine MAGTF, around the naval force, both from ship to shore to shore, and shore back to ship. So those two, the programs for the LCAC replacement and for the LCU replacement, absolutely essential.
Okay. Well, let me move to A2AD, General Berger, and Admiral, you may want to join in here. Much has been made of emerging anti-access and aerial denial, A2AD, capabilities of certain countries. To what extent are existing and emerging A2AD capabilities a concern for the amphibious assault?
I think the A2AD threat, which is well publicized, drives you towards a place where amphibious forces, the amphibious capability is even more important. And the reason for that is you're going to need, in a layered offense and defense, you're going to need forward forces, inside forces that are survivable and lethal both. So the ability to project power from a sea base, a sovereign ship, a platform from the sea, onto either an advanced naval base or to secure a commons area, a strait, for example, that might be contested. Any of those are possible missions that the maritime component commander might need to do. I mean, his job one is to keep the commons open for friendly use and perhaps deny them from a threat. So the ability to, if you did not have an amphibious force, said another way, Senator, if you lack that capability, then your only option is to bring it from some other land, some other place.
Thank you. Are we talking, is our assumption 5 miles, 25 miles? What's the distance?
It's going to be completely threat dependent. It's going to be dependent on the operating environment that commander sees in front of him.
Admiral, you have anything to add?
I would only add that A2AD is one of those peer competitor capabilities, both ours and theirs, that we track closely. This would rapidly go to a higher classification, but it's probably less range dependent than sector dependent. That's kind of how we look at it. And the ability to operate in those environments creates, advantages and disadvantages depending on how you're outfitted to deal with it.
Senator King. Just a follow-up, Mr. Secretary. Your written statement describes corrective measures being taken to address recent issues of welding quality and inadequate testing of missile tubes for the Columbia class. Can you provide your assessment of the root causes and program impact?
Yes, sir. The challenges we had with Columbia were on the missile tubes. We had similar issues on missile tubes on the Ohio program decades ago, so we had moved those missile tubes very early in the program to prove out the fabrication and welding of those assets. When we got into looking at the first set of tubes that were manufactured, there were issues with improper inspection of welds, which led to missile tubes that didn't fully meet all the specifications in terms of those weld designs. So that was an issue at a supplier. The supplier did not inspect properly the welds. Those then got shipped to the production facility.
What were the consequences to that supplier?
So that supplier is on a fixed price contract. So that supplier subcontract to EB. So that supplier now is repairing all of those missile tubes. Fortunately, we had programmed those missile tubes with a lot of margin in terms of our schedule. So we currently assess we still have 12 to 13 months of schedule margin, even with all of the missile tube repairs. And so we don't assess that will impact the Columbia build schedule, which is critical for us. But again, it's a very important issue. One of the issues that points to, and we've had a couple, we talked about the Collins shaft issue as well, is the criticality of the supply base. In the industrial base report, I think since 2000, it documented over 20,000, they call them establishments, that have disappeared from the shipbuilding industrial base, really pointing to that fragility in the supply base. And so that's one of the areas we're really focused on, ensuring, one, we've got suppliers that are building the quality products we need, and two, anywhere we have some of these single point suppliers, we try and build up their robustness.
You guys are in the building business and hardware business. Not not so much in the personnel business, except that you really are. What quality of young Americans are stepping forward now, General and Admiral? And we're asking them to handle some pretty state-of-the-art, sophisticated stuff. Am I correct?
Yes, sir, you're right. Our talent's eye-watering. And I do a lot of public speaking.
Eye-watering, yes.
Sure, and whenever the question comes up of the quality of American youth, I just simply say, come to sea with us and see them. Keeping them from getting bored is probably the biggest challenge. I mean, they are very active, they're very multitask, they grow up in an environment to communicate across multiple domains simultaneously. I got a long story I can tell you about my daughter that I use as an example, but they truly are just top shelf individuals. The challenge is it's, only 1% of Americans qualify to serve in the military. All services are competing for that talent. It's often the same talent pool that the engineering companies are competing for. So, attractive pay, benefits, the training, those are the things we continue to press forward to draw in the talent we need. It's an all-volunteer force, and that makes it a competition.
General, anything to add?
I think Secretary Gerd spoke earlier about not taking the industrial base for granted. He didn't say it in those words, but that was what he inferred, and I think you can say the same thing about the recruiting effort that the services have to do. That's an everyday, every hour of everyday effort. Because just like the Admiral said, there's a lot of competition out there for the same talent. I agree with him that the caliber of high school graduates and college students that come into the service, we've never seen anything at that level, but it's also something you can't take for granted. It's a everyday battle. And I think my personal experience, I won't speak for anyone else, my personal experience, the only time we're going to have to worry about that, really, is if they ever sense that the country is not behind them, is not supportive of them in some way, then we ought to be worried. But as long as that's the case, we'll find enough patriots, and they are very well qualified.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. We appreciate your service, and we appreciate your information to us today. And if there's nothing else, are there some magic words I'm supposed to say? Oh, I'm going to, let me just add, Senator King is right about the scheduling. Secretary Orono, in spite of her best intentions, is not going to be able to make it to the hearing at all. I'll just submit my opening statement for the record. And do we need to leave some time open? Let's leave it open for a week for questions for the record. Anything else, Senator King? Thank you, sir. And thank you, gentlemen. This hearing is adjourned.